Hi, I'm Alex Mozed, founder of Applico, and today we are on Winner Take All, where we talk about all things tech and modern monopolies. So we've got an interesting agenda today. We're going to talk about China. We have a couple platforms announcing earnings in the next couple of days. Tencent's announcing earnings tomorrow. Alibaba's announcing earnings on Thursday. And what should we expect in those earnings releases? There's also some interesting news when it comes to Huawei and their Harmony operating system, which they've launched as a result of Google not being able to work with Huawei smartphones anymore because of the trade regulation and ban on Huawei. We're going to zero in on some M&A that just happened. So Farfetch, which is a platform in Platt, large marketplace for luxury goods and products, bought Off-White. And we're going to dig into that acquisition. I think it's really interesting. There's been a lot of activity in B2B recently. Two big B2B players have announced a merger in the aircraft supply space, Wesco and Pentair. Office Depot is now saying that they are a B2B company. And Amazon has entered the sanitation and janitorial supply space. Lastly, there's an interesting company, Platt. It's in Platt, called Cars.com. And a activist investor went into Plaid a little over a year ago. And unfortunately, the stock has nosedived, losing almost half of its value just in the past couple of months. So we're going to dig into what's going on with Cars.com and try to figure that thing out. So let's go to China. If you actually look at these stocks, look at Tencent, look at Alibaba, over the past year, net, these things are down. Tencent's down off of where it was a year ago. Alibaba's down off of where it was a year ago. And these are really two of the most dominant Chinese platform companies. Alibaba's in Platt. Tencent is not, because it doesn't have enough transparency with the information it shares with the US exchanges. But what we're seeing with Alibaba, which is announcing earnings on Thursday, we wanted to dive a little bit into the numbers about just how big Alibaba is and how can we compare that to Amazon. So kind of interesting here, what Alibaba's doing in GMV, they actually haven't publicly disclosed this data for a while, but from our sources, they are doing about $806 billion in GMV, okay? Compared to Amazon is doing $277 billion in GMV. A huge differential, right? That's almost 3x the amount of GMV, the total throughput on Alibaba, which they have multiple marketplaces in China. They have Taobao, they have Tmall. They do a lot of B2B distribution in China. So China is actually ahead of the US in bringing online a lot of the B2B distribution transactions, whereas the US is really all B2C at this point. As compared to B2B being a real factor for marketplaces and e-commerce. So there's a few differentials as to why. But when you look at their revenue, okay, so Amazon has $233 billion in revenue and Alibaba has $56 billion in revenue. Also, let's understand why. So Amazon's doing a lot of 1P selling. They are also a seller in addition to their 3P third-party sellers. Jeff Bezos was saying 58% of the $277 billion number, which I think is around $160 billion, is actually sold by third-party sellers. But that leaves over $100 billion that Amazon's actually selling as a 1P seller, right? Where they buy a product, it goes on their balance sheet, and then they resell it. Whereas Alibaba's only doing about $56 billion in total revenue. So Alibaba's doing much less what we would call linear selling. And actually in China, the whole idea of being able to take a take rate where if you sell a product in my marketplace and the platform takes say 10 or 15% of that $100 product, that concept doesn't actually exist very much in China. Instead, what happened was when eBay and Alibaba were duking it out many years ago, Alibaba decided to beat out eBay by saying, we're not going to charge any take rates, any transaction fees at all. And that let the buyers and sellers meet and communicate off platform because now Alibaba wasn't relying on taking a take rate. So they didn't have to worry about buyer and seller connecting and cutting Alibaba out of that transaction, right? And that's very much so more in line with culturally how consumers, especially business consumers in China, prefer to interact when buying and selling. So what did Alibaba do? Is they built an ad revenue model. So now for sellers and merchants on Taobao, on Tmall, really a lot of this $56 billion in revenue is generated from sellers and merchants taking out ads to give themselves sponsored listings, to give themselves more tools and services that let them sell more product or be more visible in Alibaba's different marketplaces. Amazon just rolled out advertising in the past 12 to 24 months, right? So you can kind of see how the business models are very different, and therefore the revenue profiles are very different. That said, I think Alibaba's beat for the past, I think maybe 14 quarters in a row now. Profit is expected to grow at around 27%. Revenue is supposed to grow at 38%. Still very strong growth metrics. But this is supposed to be their slowest growth in 14 quarters, being affected by the US-China trade relationship. Tencent, on the other hand, which is announcing earnings tomorrow, is supposed to have about 24% in profit, whereas the year prior was only 2% in profit. And both of these companies also have very strong cloud businesses. If you think about Amazon with AWS and Microsoft with Azure, basically Alibaba and Tencent are also the number 1 and 2 players in the cloud platform arena in China. Tencent also has a lot of video games. So they own WeChat, which is a hugely popular messaging platform. Now it's a payment platform in China, and video games. So they own the maker that makes Fortnite and a number of other popular video games, both in China and in the US. So two different profile of companies, right? Alibaba much more focused on marketplaces, but they also do have cloud platform. Tencent much more focused on these kinds of more maker type platforms, content platforms that also competing in the cloud platform space, but also have different parts of their business with messaging and so on and so forth. I think both of these companies have a huge amount of growth in front of them. I think both of these companies will be able to beat earnings going into tomorrow and the day after. I think investor expectations are already hampered because of US-China trade relations, right? So the negative impact that that's going to have on the stock is already very much so priced into the expectations going into these earning releases. But if you look at the amount of growth, right? If you look at Alibaba, $800+ billion in GMV, $56 billion in revenue. When we look at their actual profit, their net income, they're making $12 billion in profit as compared to Amazon's $10 billion in profit. So it's still a company with a huge amount of growth potential in front of it. Just if you think about how they could monetize more revenue on that $800+ billion in GMV, especially compared to what Amazon is doing in their revenue to GMV ratio. Another Chinese tech company, not platform company, which I'm not as bullish on, is Huawei. So Huawei is announcing this Harmony OS, which is basically their Android alternative for smartphones and smart home devices. So all of Huawei's European smartphone business is effectively dead, I predict, because even if they launch their own Harmony operating system, they're not going to be able to build a community of third-party developers, which is really the power in a platform. It's the ecosystem. It's not the technology. So even if you have the technology of your own operating system, how are you going to go convince millions and millions of developers to now make their apps specifically for your operating system? You need a lot of demand. And just in the United States, we've seen 3 massive tech companies try this and fail. Amazon tried it with the Fire Phone. Facebook tried it. They were partnering with like LG or one of the smartphone manufacturers. That failed. Microsoft obviously tried and failed with the Windows Phone and many others. So it's very hard to actually, it's near impossible to have a third successful platform business, right, to compete against iOS, Android. I just don't think there's room for a third operating system. Now, in China, it's a different story than in the European market or in the US market. And in China, what Huawei is saying is Harmony OS is going to start out on their cloud TVs. So really, this whole news is very misleading because they make it sound like they're going to have an operating system that could rival Android on smartphones. But that's actually not the case. They're saying it's going to take them a few years for this to even be ready for smartphones, which means there's absolutely zero chance that Harmony OS has an impact outside of China on smartphones. And I think it's going to have a tough time just with cloud devices in general. We haven't really seen an operating system take off on connected TVs, for example, at all, let alone it working for Harmony OS. We've seen Apple TV, we've seen Fire TV, we've seen Google's version of this, but those are also kind of very different packages than Harmony OS. So I think Huawei is just going to have a tougher time, and the regulations that the Trump administration has put on them aren't getting any easier. So they're not going to be able to be a third successful platform. Okay, so now what we talked about last week was, on the note of Microsoft, their Twitch competitor is called Mixer, and it's a live streaming competitor, and they got Ninja, who is one of the most popular live streamers on Twitch, to come over to Mixer exclusively. So this was a big win for Mixer. We were talking about this as like a double marquee strategy where Ninja has a huge following, both from viewers, but then also other live streamers that would also want to come join the platform. So now Microsoft is able to juice both sides of that ecosystem. And this article just came out that said within 5 days of Ninja going to Mixer, they got 1 million subscribers. Ninja got 1 million subscribers on his profile on Mixer, which I'd say is a pretty good feat and pretty good early sign. Now, this is what's interesting. Twitch obviously didn't really like that their top streamer had left the platform. And so they started to advertise other competitive channels on Twitch on Ninja's profile. Now, Twitch had never done this before for any other streamer, apparently, according to Ninja, on Twitch. So he definitely felt a little chided by that. And just keep in mind that these live streamers have a huge audience of kids, right? Children, people under 16 years old. It's a much younger demographic. And so basically what happened is someone or Twitch was advertising a channel that had pornography on it. And that basically sent Ninja over the threshold. And we'll play this little clip here of his response. I'll fast forward it.
Just me. And there are also other streamers who have signed with other platforms whose stream and channel still remains the same. You can see their VODs. They don't promote other streams. They don't promote other popular channels, but they do on mine. I've been streaming for 8 years to build my brand, to build that channel, 14.5 million followers, and they were still using my channel to promote other streamers. Well, now there was a porn account that was #1 being recommended on my channel, and I have no say in any of this stuff. So this is the line, this is the straw. We're trying to get the whole channel taken down to begin with, or at least not promote other streamers and other channels on my brand.
Okay, so you get the idea, right? Big producer on Twitch leaves the platform. Twitch not happy about it, starts advertising other competitive producers on Ninja's account. Ninja obviously not happy about that. Then this pornography thing slips in there. I mean, it's just a very big oversight on Twitch's part. I'm sure they didn't purposely do this, but they launched this ability to advertise other competitors' streamers, and they didn't police it, or they didn't oversee it as well as they should have. They were sloppy. I don't think it was intentional. That would be really bad. But obviously just not a good look, not very professional. But you can see that when platforms compete, things get really hairy. Platform wars are a special thing to watch. And so Twitch definitely not happy with Ninja's departure, as he was one of their biggest celebrities. And that's what platforms do when they really get to scale. They create celebrities that weren't celebrities prior to joining the platform. So I'm sure Twitch feels pretty chided that the person they created into such a celebrity figure is now leaving them and then going to a competitor. So, it's interesting to see how the platform wars play out. Another interesting platform development is what Farfetch did, buying Off-White. So if you're not in the luxury designer good game, which is okay, I'm not either. But basically, Off-White is a huge up-and-coming brand. And the guy who founded Off-White was hired by Louis Vuitton, Virgil Abloh, I may have mispronounced it. Sorry, Virgil. But basically, Virgil's become a huge figure in the design game. And he's now Louis Vuitton's like head designer. But he also has this company, Off-White. And Farfetch just bought this for $675 million and is now going to have exclusive tie-ups with the Off-White inventory. I think this is a genius move. And let's go back to kind of acting as a producer, right? This is one of the ultimate acting as a producer strategies. Farfetch is saying, we have a marketplace for luxury designer goods. Off-White is a huge up-and-coming brand, A. B, if we can now have exclusive inventory on Farfetch, now that's just going to make our value prop that much stickier, that much more compelling for our audience of consumers. And I'm sure now also what they'll be able to do is use that to their benefit for where supply goes. Now, can they give special supply deals to the producers that are selling on Farfetch? I mean, this becomes really, really interesting as you think about how it can affect both sides of that Farfetch ecosystem. I think it was a genius move on the part of Farfetch. And in the, this is one of the reasons why you go public, because you have access to capital. You have the ability to kind of make these M&A kinds of moves that you just don't have, or it's not certainly as easy to do this if you're not a public company. So I think this will be a very interesting. Farfetch is in Plaid. Actually, let's take a look. How has their stock responded as a result of this? August 9th. It might have taken a hit. I think it actually did take a hit, but now it's back up 5%. So I think long term, this will be a great decision for the team over at Farfetch and how this just really juices their demand and supply side network effects. Another area that's not doing so hot with platform innovation is B2B distribution. So there's been a flurry of announcements here over the past week about what's going on in B2B. Office Depot says they're a B2B business, not retail. I mean, their retail business is basically nothing. They were taken over by a private equity firm. I think it's a private company. Growth in Office Depot's business service division is huge, I guess, but they're still only doing $2 billion in revenue. I mean, these guys are a sliver of the office, and you could say office supply, like MRO, part of B2B distribution. Grainger being one of the biggest with over $10 billion in revenue, the $100 billion roughly market size in the US. But Office Depot is also going to get rocked in this industry as well, because they don't have a marketplace dynamic. And this is the most commoditized vertical of B2B distribution. These office supplies, they're pack and ship. They're extremely commoditized. There's a million different manufacturers for these things. There's so many different third-party sellers and distributors. This vertical is one of the best verticals for the value prop of a B2B marketplace. Amazon Business has been in this space for multiple years now. So, I mean, I guess this is a good short-term gain for Office Depot, but long-term, there's just going to be carnage here. So good luck. But there's also more mergers. So this part of the industry, I'd say, is definitely much less commoditized. So Platinum Equity is a big private equity firm, buys Westco Aircraft for $1.9 billion. So Westco Aircraft, not to be mistaken for Westco, which is an electrical supply distributor. Westco Aircraft is a B2B distributor, but is really focused on supplying aircraft parts and different things like that. So these are much more specialized products to the aircraft industry. And what they're basically saying is that these two companies are going to merge. Patent Air is the other company that's being bundled up with Westco Aircraft. So now this will create a strong combined entity that's doing a few $1 billion in total revenue. This is a much less commoditized industry because these parts are more specialized. The buyers, think about who the customers are, right? You're buying parts as different replacement parts or for maintenance and things like this on airplanes. You have much higher requirements for quality and making sure who the manufacturer is of these things and that it's not coming from a random supplier in China. And so there's definitely much more reticence on the part of the business customer in the aircraft distribution space. that would make the adoption of a B2B marketplace like Amazon just much slower. There are a lot of parts here that are pack and shippable, but there's also a lot of parts that are definitely heavy and just much more rare to find. So I don't think this is a prime area for a B2B marketplace to come into. And this transaction will probably do pretty well, just given that it's much farther down on the list of commoditized industries that a B2B marketplace could roll into. And then in, the short to mid term, which is really what these, a lot of these investments are made over that life cycle, they'll probably be able to get good cost synergies and leverage different customer and product catalogs and do well with a play like this. But this is one of those rare areas within B2B distribution that I think something like this could actually work out pretty well. So the other news here is that Amazon is now entering the sanitation space and janitorial space. Okay. You could say, what's the difference between this and MRO? I mean, there's a lot of overlap. But the point is, this is also highly commoditized. Amazon Business is coming in here strong. And it says here, it stands to reason that Amazon would launch a commercial private label program in the janitorial paper category as they seek to own the entire strata of the food chain. If you're a janitorial and sanitation B2B distributor, you should have seen that this was coming. This is only getting started. Amazon's going to come hot and heavy. They're going to bring their own white label products. As we've spoken about before, they've rolled out this Amazon commercial store, which is now their own white label products, kind of like what they've done with over 3,000 private label, white label products on the B2C side. They're doing that on the B2B side. It's commoditized. It's highly fragmented. It has all the recipe list of things that would make for a B2B marketplace in the janitorial and sanitation space wildly successful. And I'd say definitely have a winner take all market, definitely command over 50% of the market share in the industry over the next 5 to 10 years. Absolutely. I think it'll be interesting to see, what does Walmart do? What does eBay do? What does Alibaba do? Are they already in this space? Are they now going to do things any differently with this news? So we'll see about that. Let's end on cars.com. So cars.com is basically a marketplace to buy and sell a car. Now, the interesting thing with this industry is that there's actually multiple players in the buying and selling of cars. So there's cars.com in Platt. Car Gurus is also in Platt. Auto Trader, which is owned by Cox. So if you think about Cox with like TV stations and other media properties, so that's not in Platt. Edmunds, which is smaller, KBB, eBay. So eBay has eBay Auto, and then of course Craigslist. So there's not as much of a winner-take-all dynamic in this buying and selling of used cars. And I think there's a lot of interesting reasons as to why that is. One being that a lot of these transactions are actually taking place off the platform. So very much so these marketplaces are kind of like 1.0 marketplaces. So the way they're making money is not on GMV or having a take rate, or even facilitating the flow of money from buyer to seller through the platform. Instead, they're really just more of kind of an advertising marketplace of sorts, right? So if you're a seller, you basically pay for a package to be able to post a listing, kind of like you do on Craigslist. So you're not taking a take rate off of selling a $10,000 car. That would generally be cost prohibitive. So the margins are much smaller, and they don't have a true similar take rate model that you see with Amazon or with eBay or with a Farfetch, a lot of other product marketplaces. So as a result, you've seen this industry kind of fragment a lot because there's a lot of these kind of more so these marketplaces that you come to meet buyers and sellers, and then you transact offline. So I haven't really seen anyone go much deeper into the actual payment side of things. And I think that's actually a big missed opportunity here. So could you create a lending marketplace? Could you let a lot of third-party lenders come in and provide credit to different types of buyers and actually try and close that loop, actually try and keep that transaction within your marketplace? I think that would substantially change the economics in the industry, and then actually try to capture what I would classify as platform leakage, which is basically just you come here to meet and then you leave. That's pretty big platform leakage. How could you now keep those transactions in the marketplace? Money's a good hook. Who else have we seen do this? We saw Alibaba do this with Ant Financial. That's basically what Alibaba was. If we rewind to the beginning of today's episode, Alibaba would charge their sellers for advertising. Ant Financial would then basically be an escrow account. So then you would basically say, hey, I am an interested qualified buyer. I'm going to put this money into escrow while we figure out and finalize all the details and shipment. And then you ship me the product. Then when I verify that you shipped the product, now I have the money in escrow, and it just simplifies that whole transaction, right? Otherwise, there's a lot of friction. Now I've given you a physical product and maybe you renege on the payment. A lot of sellers were getting burned that way on different Alibaba marketplaces. That was the genesis of Ant Financial. So could there essentially be a similar model here? So that was essentially a payment platform, right? Helping the buyer and seller exchange money. Is there a payment platform angle here? Is there a lending marketplace angle here where you could actually help buyers get access to credit? I think that's what's needed. And basically what happened is, so the reason why Cars.com stock has tanked, and I mean tanked, not good for the ETF, not helping out the curve here. Okay, there. Look at this. Boom, like in the 25 range, and then now sub $10. This thing has lost like 60% of its value just in the past month. And there's an activist investor called Starboard, I believe, that came in a little over a year ago and said, hey, we're going to put Cars.com up for sale. We think that they're missing a lot of value and that they should sell themselves. Okay, so the stock rose when this activist investor came in, and then basically they took 9 months or so to then do an exploratory process, I think with JP Morgan, to see if any buyers would be interested in buying Cars.com. Unfortunately, that didn't work out so well, and no one wants to buy Cars.com, which then drove their stock price tanking, along with some other factors, growth and other things weren't looking as well as they would have hoped. But not a good sign if no one is up to even buy you or even put in a bid. You would think, given the amount of fragmentation in this industry, right? At least 5 different material players here. Car Gurus, Public, Auto Trader, pretty big player. Edmunds, KBB, eBay, Craigslist not buying anyone, but still, handful of other players. You would think that one of them would want to consolidate, and then with a more consolidated and a stronger position, hopefully in a winner-take-all market, that an acquisition and M&A would make sense. Unfortunately, I think because the network effects here really haven't been trending towards winner-take-all for the reasons that I just went over, I think that's part of the reason why there really wasn't that interested of a buyer. No one's really been able to capture that lock-in effect and actually make a sticky network effect here between buyer and seller and facilitate that transaction from end to end. As a result of that, I can understand why buying Cars.com didn't make any sense. So these would be some of the interesting. There's still platforms, but these are really like 1.0 marketplaces, right? These are kind of like a Craigslist, but just a better user experience, a more tailored user experience, and then they charge a little bit more for ads. But it's basically like these 1.0 type of marketplaces. And this is what's interesting. So IAC, Barry Diller, understands this. Angie's List, Home Advisor, those are more 1.0 marketplaces as well. They don't really handle the money. The flow of money doesn't really go through the platform. They're more like referral engines, which is basically what these auto marketplaces are. When Angie's List and Home Advisor bought Handy, Handy's 2.0 marketplace, right? Handy does own the flow of money, right? Handy does have a much tighter level of accountability to the consumer, because now the consumer isn't picking the actual provider of services on Handy. It's actually the platform saying, here's someone good who's going to come clean your home or install your TV, and you're going to be happy. And you don't actually pick the actual service provider. Handy gives you the service provider, and then you pay a flat rate, hourly rate for their services. That's a very different transaction model. That's a much more evolved transaction model than these 1.0 marketplaces, where it's kind of whoever and whatever goes on the platform, and then it's completely up to the consumer to make that buying decision. So the 2.0 marketplaces are much harder, right? There's a much more level of ownership and accountability and responsibility put on the platform, which means that there's a lot more work, and like these auto marketplaces would really have to transform how they do what they do, right? If they were to handle payments or the flow of money or lending, that's a completely different model than what they have today. So we just haven't seen any of these players, I think, really take that full steam. In the way that I think is interesting to see what Barry Diller is doing with the home services roll up. Now they have the 1.0 marketplaces and they have the 2.0 marketplaces. And I think putting the two of those things together is going to be very interesting to see how, if they can capture more concretely some of those network effects in the home services space. And maybe there's some lessons learned for this auto space as well. So that's everything we've got for today. Thanks for joining, and I'll talk to you in a couple days.